Thank you very much for coming to this particular session. Now, my name is Mark Tufnell. I'm president of the Country Land and Business Association, and I'm going to take you through a session for the next hour called Towards Climate Friendly Farming. And I'm fortunate that I have three farmers here to talk you through what they have done on their farms. We have Chris Addison from the north, who's going to talk about his dairy. We have Johnny Wake, who's a conventional farmer in the sort of middle of the country. We have Sophie Alexander from the south-ish of the country, depending where you start from, who's going to talk about her dairy and her cereals that she produces on her farm. And then we're going to get an important take from Janet Hughes, who many of you will know is the program director from DEFRA. She's developing the environmental land management program. And the most important message you can take away this morning is that Sustainable Farming Incentive 2022 soil standards will be open from the end of this month. Yep. There'll be applications there for you to make on a very simple landing page. And I thoroughly recommend that you take up the offer that's there from government, because without taking it up, we could have the possibility of having the money taken away from us for other causes. And I, for one, would not want to see that happen, because I think there's so much in the programme that is good and that can benefit all of you. And so, just to emphasise, the Country Land and Business Association, we have 28,000 members across England and Wales, representing landowners who wish to protect and promote their property rights. And it's something that we've been managing to do since 1907, and we shall continue to do that. So, without any further ado from me, and I'm just going to facilitate and help the Q&A session when we get to it, we're going to have some short presentations from the speakers. I'll do some questions, and then we'll have some Q&A from the floor, and then we'll finish at 1 o'clock. Thank you. I'm going to hand over straight to Chris Addison.
And so I just want to talk about our farm. We are mixed farming. And this is not my Cumbrian farm. This is 6 miles away, halfway up the top of the hill. This is near Shap. And so I don't farm there. I farm not there, neither. That's an intensive dairy farm in Kirby Thor, another 5 miles down the hill. So I'm halfway down the hill or halfway up the hill, depending on which way you're looking. So this is my farm. We're mixed farming and muddled thinking. We have farming about 550 acres. We have 150 organic dairy Montbelliard cows with 70 followers. We've been organic since 2007. We had to decide back in 2007 whether to sell the cows or upgrade the cows to, say, 200, 300 cows. That wasn't in our nature. We wanted to do something different. So going organic seemed to be the right thing at the right time, to add value and to run alongside our conservation principles. And also, if it failed, we could also hold our hands up and say we could go back. And also, this year, Hugh, one of my sons, he's actually started a fledgling natural organic yogurt business. So Live Organics, please, there's a plug. And then our milk goes to Ormsco, who's going through tough times. I'm sort of very envious of Sophie over there as an Arla organic farmer. And their milk price is, I think, about 54 pence. Ours is currently 37, going up to about 48 in the next month. So that'll be a big help. We've just become PWAB accredited, which means completely antibiotic-free. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. That is a point of difference. But that is where Ormsco think there will be some opportunities in the future. We have a mixed beef and sheep enterprise consisting of 15 Simmentaler and Angus pedigree suckler herd. And we're also producing 200 fat cattle and organic store cattle, currently going to ABP, or we do have a niche butcher down in Lancashire who takes 30 prime butcher's cattle every year. Our sheep enterprise used to be 300 North lambing mules, and eventually I saw the light 10 years ago after complete nagging by my consultant to get rid of those sheep. So just despite it, I have a gambling habit. So I buy 400 wild Scotties just to annoy her, but anyway, they do make a little bit of money. And back to the mixed farming. We're also into tourism. We have 2 holiday barns, which were converted during COVID, and have produced and provided another income stream to compensate for the reducing in BPS. Finally, but not least, our environmental, or maybe our climate enterprise, which contributes only 4% of turnover, but which provides so much more. It is the backbone and the fabric of the farm. Our environmental journey started back in the 70s and 80s. My father was passionate about forestry, and we were always planting trees along the River Livenet. We used various schemes, but a lot of the work was carried out without any formal funding. We just did it for the love of it. However, over the last 20 years, we've been in various schemes, including the high-level stewardship scheme, which we're currently into. As you can see, the latest scheme centres on 60 acres of woodland pasture, alongside several acres of bird and nectar mixtures, which we have planted this last 2 years. We have several hundred metres of hedging to complement the existing hedges. We also make hay on 30 acres to aid the curlews, my favourite bird. And one of the pleasures this spring was not to kick my cows out on the 20th of April, but was to see that we'd reared another 2 curlew chicks, and we've actually left that field. We should be cutting it if I was a really traditional and intensive farmer. I should have cut it about a month ago, but I wanted to leave it there until these 2 chicks have gone and started to fly. We are lucky to have the River Livenet, a triple SSI running through the farm. That's a tributary of the Eden. It's a triple SSI with rare white crayfish, kingfishers and otters, and not beavers yet, but you never know. And this has enabled us to plant steep banks and create wildlife corridors running from 35 acres of woodland right down to the river. The woodlands have created many benefits, from shelters, fencing, using it for furniture, but they're just brilliant. Recently, we worked in partnership with the Eden Rivers Trust to slow the flow, which I can see in the bottom right-hand corner. This was part of a wider landscape scheme to reduce flooding, such as Storm Desmond in 2016, which had deposited 13 inches of rain in 24 hours in Cumbria. It was catastrophic. In the future, I hope that our environmental resources will help in our challenging carbon zero ambitions. We currently stand at 1.01 kilograms carbon dioxide per kilogram, depending on which system you use. Please, could we have an accurate and standardised carbon toolkit? We are currently working with our milk buyer, Omsco, and I was briefly before listening to the Yo Valley presentation about carbon and organic levels in our soils. So we're working with Omsco to find methods to increase them. I would like to think that from the many benefits from our biodiversity and our wildlife, they would create opportunities in the future. And I'd also like to approach, possibly given the slowing the flow, we might actually get insurance companies like Aviva to contribute to slowing the flow. Finally, we may be a mixed farming with muddled thinking, or is it muddled farming with mixed thinking? But I think there's a future. We're back in fashion. And just one comment I actually saw in the last presentation of the Yo Valley, that we do need to be profitable. I mean, that might be a little bit of an underline, but to be green, we have to be in the black. And that was quoted by Jeremy Clarkson in the Sunday Times last week, but actually I think he nicked it off Isabella Tree from the Knipe Rewilding Project. Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. I don't think you're in a muddle at all. I think you've got some very sound things going on towards climate-friendly farming. So let's turn our attention away from dairy and away from the hills up north to somewhere a little bit closer to here, and we'll hear from Johnny Wake.
Thank you, Mark. Mark, you asked me to go between Chris and Sophie. I feel like the proverbial poo sandwich, with me being the poo between the two dairy organic farmers, with me the arable conventional farmer. My name's Johnny Wake. I'm the managing partner of Courtenay Hall Farms. Here's a picture of where we are. I'm also a policy member of the CLA, hence probably why I'm here. I'm on the Cam Grain Sustainability Committee, and I chair our local cluster farm in terms of my background, I'm actually a doctor, medical doctor, and I work briefly for the Department of Health, so I know what it likes to feel like a civil servant in Janet's chair as well. But to tell you a little bit about Courton Hall, particularly from a carbon point of view, we're based in South North Hants. We farm on the urban fringe. We're a little bit over 2,000 acres of mixed soils, predominantly Hansop clay. So generally speaking, it's heavy land. And we're arable farmers, we're poultry farmers, and we're beef farmers. And the fourth type of farming I think we do is stewardship. So I'm going to talk about those four things and then specifically about carbon. In terms of arable, as Mark said, we are conventional, and I'm not going to be embarrassed about that. I love the way we farm. We've been min-till for 8 years now on heavy land. It's a challenge with blackgrass and other things like that, as many of you will appreciate. But min-till is the way for us. We've been using cover crops, as I know many of you will do, and we've been doing reduced traffic for a long time now, and I think that's really important. But fertilizer reduction is the big thing for arable farming at the moment, and I'm sure we'll come to talk about that later. But in terms of what we've been doing, we've been using human waste for many years, and of course, now that we're poultry farmers, we've been using the poultry muck. So that's helped build up organic matter in our soils really effectively. And we're also part of a fertilizer efficiency trial at the moment with Mapavag and Kellogg's Origins, which if we talk about fertilizer, I'll bore you with about later. In terms of poultry, here's our manager, Carl, with some chicks. We have about 340,000 birds. They're indoors in very new sheds, modern sheds, and this allows for a really high feed conversion ratio. So from a carbon point of view, you're producing animal protein for a relatively low carbon count, and there's a focus on really, really high welfare with our birds, and that obviously produces a more efficient bird as well. They are heated with Groundswell heat pumps, underfloor heating, and we have solar panels on the roof. And I'm sure we'll talk about renewables. And there's a nice virtuous circle there. Obviously, we're using the muck on the fields, and we're using the wheat on the farm to go straight into the chickens. Soy is the big challenge in the poultry industry, and the big challenge for us, which, again, we'll probably end up talking a bit more about later. And these are my favourite. These are our traditional Herefords. We've relatively recently gone back into having traditional Herefords. Very low input, extensive grazing, no supplementary feed. They're out all winter. And at the moment, we supply our meat into Ethical Butcher, who are just around there. Go and see them later if you like. And we're hopefully going to be supplying our own farm shop in a bit as well. And then on to stewardship, which, as I say, we see as the fourth type of farming. We've just come out of mid-tier and have entered into a large higher-tier 10-year scheme. Lots of capital works within that, and I'm sure lots of you have been in stewardship schemes already. Our capital works include 3.5 kilometres of hedge planting, over 10 kilometres of hedge laying, tree planting, all the usual things. And of course, we're putting down a lot of AB8, your wildflower mix, AB9, your wild birdseed mix. We're doing quite a lot of WD6, which is woody pasture for the cattle, which will be really interesting to see how that pans out over 10 years. And it should be very good from a carbon point of view too. And a lot of AB15 in our rotation now. We're going from just having a few fields of it to it being a really major part of the rotation. So that's your leguminous fallow. And again, from a carbon point of view, that should make quite a difference. In terms of other carbon things, I don't want to tread too much on where we're going later, Mark, but what we're doing in terms of measurement, because clearly measurement is going to be a key issue. We've done AgriCalc with Leaf as part of their nature-based solutions, and that's been a very interesting exercise, but both pros and cons, as you know, to all the calculators. And we've done Cool Farm Tool with Indigo, who did a really interesting trial of some of their farms, whereby they looked at the carbon count for each tonne of crop produced and each hectare. And again, we could talk about that a bit later maybe. We're currently working on a more detailed AgriCalc calculation for our poultry, which we know is not going to be great because of the whole soy issue. And the aim is to inevitably end up with our whole business carbon calculated. The other thing we're doing in terms of measurement is working with Ecometric, who are here today, who are doing a very different form of measurement, which again, perhaps we'll talk about later. We've got lots of renewables, really keen on renewables, 16 ground source heat pump systems. I can bore you for Britain on ground source heat pumps, so I better not say any more about that, but they're resi and commercial, really big to really small. Air source heat pumps, solar, a lot of solar on the roof, a little bit of solar thermal, and we're certainly planning on having more PV. We're looking at batteries. We've got a pre-app in for wind at the moment, and we're hopefully getting an AD plant as well. And we've just signed up with SSE for a big green electricity contract, which actually makes a surprising difference to your carbon count. It's an area of interest, one to perhaps look at. And we're one of the 4 pilot farms for the GWCT, who have government funding for the Hedgeland Carbon Code, which is the government's efforts to get the equivalent of the Woodland Carbon Code for hedges, which I think is absolutely key, and hedges are grossly underrated as to how much carbon they can store. we're putting a farm shop and cafe in. We've just got planning permission through for that, and that, of course, will reduce food miles and ensure a market for what we're producing. And last but not least, we're working with a company to do hydroponics, but in a different way, a less energy-intensive way, so hopefully a more carbon-friendly way, with no LEDs, just using polytunnels and natural sunlight. Thank you very much.
So, Johnny, thank you very much. Lots that he's covered, lots that you may or may not be doing on your own farm. So we'll move now from Northamptonshire down to Dorset, and we'll hear from Sophie Alexander.
Thank you very much. I want to start by asking all of you a question, which is, if you were able to start with a completely clean piece of paper, as it were, metaphorically, start again, farming tomorrow, would you choose to farm tomorrow as you are today? And that was really a choice I had 2011. We benchmarked part of the farm, which was conventional, very high input, with another section which had become organic under other stewardship. And after about 3 years, the choice was clear. We haven't applied artificial fertilizer or biocide since. And if you do that, your only option is to prioritize soil biology and structure. And we were starting from a really low base. This is chalk downland, and it had been hard used. So it has been a journey. When you change one thing in your farm, a catalogue of demands over time present themselves. It's fascinating and a really enjoyable, if at times nail-biting, journey. Having other people's animals to start with helped. I realized without artificial fertilizer, I had to have animals. And it's, made an improvement, but nothing as much as incorporating cover crops, which lots of you do. And now, 11 years later, with our partners, the Roaming Dairy, we've actually got 300 dairy cows. But unlike Chris, we can outwinter them all the year round. They're outside 24/7. And that's kind of magic, because it's like compost, which we also make a great deal of. It's alchemy. You turn a waste product into a very valuable resource. So cows are an asset, just because they're generally there for a number of years, hopefully a lot of years. These cows are manuring the ground as they go along. There's a separation of feces and urine as they trample and graze the ground. We're mob grazing, rotationally grazing. And they're producing a second income stream for the farm. I'm not just dependent on cereals. I'm also producing milk. So part of being more climate friendly, I think it's about resilience. It's definitely about making money. And what the cows have also done, they've revved up the whole ecological engine. The place is beginning to hum. The biology in the soil, the cow pats. I ought to be giving you some of my slides because it does illustrate this, but I'd forgotten that in the excitement of talking to you all. So there we are, some soil activity. And last year I was despondent. I thought our dung beetles were distinctly missing, and I got dung beetle spotters in. But, just after 2 years of running our own herd, they're definitely coming back. And it's a low-input system, so they have very little feed, a little bit in the parlour. We're growing it ourselves. This is an experiment in intercropping. So you get 2 crops in the space of 1. This is wheat and beans. So the wheat, all being well, will go for milling. Most of our cereals go for human consumption, but I will keep the beans back to mill for the cows. It seems counterintuitive to want to get closer to climate-friendly farming and yet introduce cattle. But the thing is, any infrastructure that you build will count against your carbon footprint now, as I have already found out. We've used the carbon toolkit. It's fascinating. It gives you a really good starting point, and you can model scenarios on your farm. But because we gave up artificial inputs, it released working capital that we could employ elsewhere, like putting PV panels on a barn, but improving the grain conditioning, cleaning. But all those things are on your carbon footprint for 10 years. So mine's pretty sky high at the moment, 300 new cattle. But they are what's going to get us there, because they're going to drive the soil so that we can grow better crops and gradually over time increase our yields. So I'll leave you with that. There's technical sort of boring things like using less plastic. I think that helps with climate-friendly farming. And I'm going to leave you with that by Selina, because I think it's such a fabulous illustration of soil. Thank you very much.
Sophie, thank you. So Sophie has been on a journey, as she quite rightly said. Janet is on a journey for all of us, for all of you. She's there representing government, coming up with a scheme that she's worked very hard with stakeholders, particularly the Country Land and Business Association. And I just love your take on how you help all of us here move towards climate-friendly farming.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me here. Lovely to see you all. Oh, it's hot and I stood up too quickly. That keeps happening to me when I'm on panels with you. So climate-friendly farming, first of all, what is it? I think we need to encompass both aspects of climate when we think about climate-friendly farming. So we talk a lot about carbon and other emission reductions and sequestration, but we also need farmers to be getting us ready to adapt to climate change. And of course, farmers are at the forefront of feeling the impacts of climate change in the form of more extreme weather events and droughts and all that kind of stuff. But also, we need you to store more water on your land. We need you to be able to attenuate flood risk and all of those things too. And there's a lot of this that can only be delivered by farmers, because you're the ones who look after 70% of the land in this country. But first and foremost, farmers are for producing food, and you're running businesses. And so we in government obviously need to recognise that first and foremost. And what we need to do is get behind you producing food in a profitable business, and also being climate friendly in the ways we've just talked about, not choosing between one or the other, but those things need to go hand in hand, and we need to get behind you and not get in the way, as we've done historically. And so we talk a lot about farmers' roles, but actually we think the most important change that we've got to make is not about what you do, but about what we in government do and how we interact with you. And the way we want to interact with you is we want to have a relationship with you that is mutually respectful and trusting and supportive. We want you to see us like you'd see your vet or trusted agronomist or other advisor as people who have something useful to offer, know what we're talking about, want you to succeed, and can help you do that. And we understand that we are not in that position now, and that we've given you a lot of reason to not trust us and not have confidence in us over quite a long period of time. So we know we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we're operating in a way that is respectful and fair and helpful and supportive and proportionate. We do, of course, need to enforce those cases where someone is committing fraud or willfully polluting the river or destroying the environment. But in the vast majority of cases, that's not what farmers are interested in doing. They are interested in producing food and taking care of the environment, and we need to get behind you and help you with that. And if we don't sort that bit of the equation out, sorting out how we interact with you and earning your trust, then none of the rest of the stuff that I'm talking about is going to work, because you're not going to want to come into government schemes, you're not going to want to have a visit from somebody, you're not going to want to be interested in our regulation or anything else that we've got to offer. So first thing for us is sort out, we need to change first in order to help you to adopt the changes that some of these farmers have been talking about. The second thing we need to do is, as part of that, we need to make sure that we're recognising there's huge diversity just on this panel between these three farmers here and the different approaches that they're taking, depending on where they are, what sort of farm they've got, what sort of business they've got, what sort of preferences they've got personally. And that's absolutely right. We like having a diverse sector. We like having a diverse countryside. And we in government have got to support that diversity and enable you to make decisions that make sense both for your business and for climate. So that's what we're here to do. It's going to take a little bit longer than 10 minutes, but we are on it. We've made some progress, and I hope that you'll see when we do open the Sustainable Farming Incentive for applications by the end of the month. I'm saying it in that way because we're just doing final testing. So there is a possibility it might not be then, but we're confident. It'll be the end of the month. When we do open that, I hope you'll see we've made it much more straightforward, much more flexible, much more proportionate controls, so you can rely on us to not come and fine you and slap penalties on you just because something's 1 centimetre out here or there, but instead have a supportive, respectful relationship with you. And I hope you'll see that when that comes out, and do take a look, as Mark said. The things we're going to be offering through the reforms that I'm responsible for implementing are, we're looking at how we regulate farming in the countryside to make that fairer and more proportionate and more effective, and less complicated and more clear for you all, to make sure we prevent damage. We're also going to be offering a whole range of grants, because there's quite a lot of capital investment required to make some of the changes that you need to make. So we'll be offering grants for environmental features, productivity improvements, innovation, research and development, whether that's about doing some innovation on your farm or doing some research or adopting innovative practices, and also improving animal health and welfare, which can also have a knock-on effect for climate and productivity. So there's a whole range of grants on offer. At the moment, there's a bit of a plethora, and you have to know what they are and where to find them. That's not very good. So we're going to start offering them all through a single place online where you can go and search for the thing you want a grant for and find it in language that you would understand, not our made-up policy language. That's coming. It's going to take us a little while to marshal everything into that situation, but hopefully that will make it easier for you to access what you want when you want it. So that's the grants, that's one-off payments. And then we're also offering ongoing payments for you to adopt or maintain or continue practices which are good for climate and also good for biodiversity, water quality, air quality, flood risk mitigation, climate change adaptation. We're interested in a much wider range of outcomes, not just climate, and we pay for things that are good for that range of outcomes and good for your farm in the main. And a lot of what we're paying for through the Sustainable Farming Incentive is stuff that if you're doing any sort of regenerative or organic practices, you will already be doing, so do take a look. So ongoing payments will range from sharing type activities, so how you take care of your soil, optimising your fertilisers, integrated pest management, and then also things you can do around your farming, around taking care of precious habitats, sparing less productive areas for nature. And if you want to go even further than that, we are interested in entering into some bespoke, much longer term, much more significant projects to restore either watercourses or habitats, and that's called landscape recovery. We've just done the first round of applications for that set of projects. And the idea is that through that range of things, the grants and the ongoing payments will provide you each with a range of choices that make sense for you. No one's going to use everything that we have to offer. Not everyone's got livestock, so you won't be interested in the animal health and welfare grants, but you might be interested in sustainable farming. So there's a range of choices. You make the choices, and we're here to help you make those choices work for your business and for the environment. And then there's some wider work in DEFRA. We mentioned the rules of the game when it comes to carbon trading, where we're looking at what we want to happen is we want you to be able to earn an income from a range of sources. So some from government, some from the private sector, to do the things that we need to see done in order to achieve our very ambitious goals for biodiversity, water, etc. And we want to not crowd out that market. We want you to be able to do those things alongside each other safely so that you can rely on the way that you're doing that and feel safe doing it, and you can have that range of choices. And for that to happen, we've got to design our schemes so that we don't crowd out private funding. So if you come into the Sustainable Farming Incentive, there's no restriction on you also being in a private scheme at the same time on the same land. But also there's work to be done to establish the rules of the game through the work that's been mentioned on the carbon code and through making sure that there are some recognised ways of doing measurement, guaranteeing additionality, guaranteeing permanence of carbon sequestration so that everybody's got a kind of fair marketplace to play in. And there's a team alongside mine that's doing a lot of the work on that too, with equal amounts of energy to the energy that we're putting in my team to the reforms of our schemes and grants. So I'm very happy to take your questions now, but if you don't get a chance today, then I'm dead easy to find on the internet. I'm on Twitter, I'm on the Farming Forum, or you can email me, janet.hughes@defra.gov.uk. Find me afterwards if you want my details. I'm really easy to find, and I'm always really keen to hear from farmers. Come and see what you're doing. Find out how's it actually working for you, because we really want to work in partnership for you with you to make these reforms work and endure in a way that completely transforms our relationship and enables you to do the stuff that only you can do, producing food and protecting our natural environment. So hit me up either afterwards or on the internet.
Thank you very much indeed. So we've heard snippets from our panel. I'm just going to ask a question or two of the panel. Please think of a question. We have a roving microphone that's going to go round with gentlemen at the back. I'll direct who's going to ask the question, but when you do, please make sure you actually speak into the microphone. And also, it'd be very helpful if you give your name. And this is all being filmed, so that's why the microphone is important. So the first question that I've got, just for the panel here, is effectively, how do you decide where to focus your carbon reduction efforts? And what are your timescales? And I'm going to ask Johnny first. Bad luck. Because you've got a great mix of enterprises, and you've also got enterprises near this particular, well, nearish to this farm. So have a go first, and then the others can have a think. And I've got a separate question. I'll only ask one of you after this.
So how do we choose what to focus on? Like, I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's about aiming for the easier things first before you tackle the hard things. So for us, that's been reducing our energy consumption, putting in renewables. The harder things are the things we can't control. So like soy, for example, with our poultry, we don't have a choice about that because we have a deal with our integrator and we have to buy the feed from them. So it's a question of lobbying them. I think fertilizer is a really interesting one that we're focusing on at the moment because there's clearly potential to improve that, and it has a massive impact on carbon. So A, it's about the easy wins, but B, I suppose it's about figuring out what are the big hitters for you. So in arable, it's very likely to be fertilizer. If you're in a livestock arena which is using soy, it's very likely to be soy. So even if you make a relatively small change to those things, it can actually have a big impact on your carbon footprint. But clearly, measurement is such a big part of all this, and understanding what your baseline is really crucial too.
Thank you. And Chris, you mentioned your carbon enterprise, which you said was quite small, but actually a lot of what you do within your other businesses are actually quite focused in reducing the amount of carbon that you emit. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, our carbon enterprises, I put that in. We obviously have an ambition to get to carbon zero by, I think, is it 2030 or 2040, depending on what you leave. Obviously, our milk processor requires us or wants us to get to that level to aim to improve their brand and to their links with the consumer. I would like, as I said before, to measure our carbon in an accurate and improved manner. There's so many different toolkits for measuring carbon. We do need to have the right one. I have a lot of what I call biodiversity assets or resources that don't get counted on any of the toolkits available at the moment, such as the width of a hedge, how much carbon is sequestered in permanent pasture. And also we have, as I say, about 35 acres, 40 acres of woodland. We have a small biomass plant, 40 kilowatts, which provides heat for the dairy parlour. And as going back to what Johnny says, we are actually looking at solar panels. We do have a very small solar heating system. And so we are looking at solar panels to improve our carbon footprint. But it's also what the consumer or what our processors demand and require of us, is that's where we're heading for.
No, great, thank you. And I'd like to ask Sophie, so what are your customers asking of you in terms of net zero, if anything? And how have you adapted? And I say that particularly because the really big retailers, for example, Tesco's, other companies are available, and we are fortunate to have in the audience somebody who's working with Tesco, who used to work for the Country Land and Business Association, and I'm very grateful that she's here. But at what stage, it's quite a complicated question, if you're asked by your retailer, well, what's your carbon footprint? Well, what do you do about it? Sophie, what's the answer?
We've commissioned our own carbon assessments. I said the Farm Carbon Toolkit, and that's ongoing work. So we can give that information to anyone that asks. But then they're just simple things. Arla asks that you use a renewable power source, so you can change contracts. We have got PV panels, and as I said, the health of the cattle drives so much. So I want to create much more shade. As things are, they need shade and shelter. So our tree planting plan is now gaining momentum, and that's going to be, over 5 or 6 years. So it is all work in progress. I wish I had more robots, fuel-free farm machinery, but so far I'm afraid none of them cut the mustard. I mean, electric buggies, anyone, or electric quad bikes? I haven't found they are farm-proof.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to ask Janet a question, then I'm going to throw it open to the floor. Janet has spoken about changing relationship between government and all of us, and I farm just as well as, at the same time as trying to be a president of this organisation. So I'm in the swim, I'm in the river. And DEFRA have a vision as to where we're all going. I'm involved in talks all the time with Janet, and I fully understand the vision. But change, trying to bring about change, is really difficult. And how do you persuade people that change is going to benefit them and also benefit this move towards climate-friendly farming? It's about change management, and has DEFRA a plan to create a push in that direction?
Yeah, do you mean the change that farmers need to make, or that we in government need to make, or both?
No, I think it's about farmers, because you can... Paul Cherry here has started something that he didn't think would last for very long, and suddenly there are thousands of us here doing something that nobody ever thought of 10 years ago, and lo and behold, it works. That's why we're all here, to have a look and learn.
Yeah.
And that's change, but it's taken a long time.
So I think there's a few different aspects to this. The first is to recognise that a lot of the change that we want to see already exists in the sector, and what we've been doing is either not helping with it or actively getting in the way of it. In some cases, we've helped with it, and I think in recent years we've done a better job, but still, we can do a better job of actually getting behind those that are already changing. So I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we think farmers are all over there and we've got to persuade them to come over here. That's not really the case. Farmers are at the cutting edge of feeling the effects of climate change and feeling the effects of uncertain weather and noticing the biodiversity and the soil health and other things on their farm. And so we've got to show a bit more respect than we have, I think, historically, for the fact that farmers are already doing a lot of this work, and we've got to get behind you. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, I think, is about making sure that before we talk about anything else, we've got to recognise farmers' job is to produce food. And there is no other profession I can think of that the rest of us rely on every single day in the way we rely on farmers, and to do that job. And we really need you to carry on doing that job. And we have not done a good enough job of saying that out loud enough, and making clear that we're not asking you to stop doing that. We're asking you to do some things in the course of doing that and alongside it. And in order to do that, exactly as you've said, you've got to have a profitable business, haven't you? So it's about us recognise. It's not about standing over here saying, hey, come and do this environmental stuff and forget about your business, forget about food. That's not important to us. It's about saying, what can we fund, what can we enable, what can we support that is good for your business, good for food production for the country as a whole, and good for the environment and climate. And we think there's an awful lot that we can do that supports all three of those. And then when farmers can see this is not only not going to damage my business, but it's actually going to be good for it in the long term, then you can have a very different sort of conversation. But you can't have a respectful conversation with a farmer if you're not going to recognise what it is that they're actually trying to do day to day, which is feed themselves and their family and actually the rest of the country, which is quite important. So I think there's that. And then I think there's a sort of there's a bit more of a kind of positive narrative that we need to generate collectively around farming, isn't there? Which I think we can play a role in, but it has to be collective, where I often talk to farmers who are doing amazing things and ask them, why are you not shouting from the rooftops about this amazing work you're doing? And it's because they get pilloried when they do that. So you put your head above the parapet on Twitter or anywhere else saying, well, I'm doing this nature-friendly thing. You get loads of people coming at you saying, well, you're causing climate change, actually, and it's all your fault that all these terrible things are happening. And we've got to change that narrative around farming, and we've got to make more visible the sort of creativity, entrepreneurialism, resilience, sheer doggedness of farmers to just keep going in really tough circumstances and doing incredible things for our countryside. We've got to get that narrative a bit more positive, because we can't have a kind of trusting, respectful relationship with such a negative narrative around everything. It's really hard, isn't it? If everybody's coming at you, it's hard to be trusting. So I think it's a mix of all those things, and probably I could talk about this for at least 3 hours, because I think there's an awful lot we need to do on it.
Thank you. And you've all been very patient. Now, who in the time we've had, 40 minutes, has actually thought of a question that you would like to ask? So, gentlemen over there, keep your hand up, and the microphone's coming round. Be patient for the microphone. Thank you very much. And if you can pick out a panelist, that's helpful, but a general one is fine.
I think I'll pick out Johnny Wake. My name's Rob Shepherd, but actually it's a general question, and it might be more apposite to you, Janet, but it's about the feeding of cereals to produce protein in this country, and we've become so dependent upon cereal and imported soya, and we're actually feeding 4 calories of plant to produce 1 calorie of meat. And that's in the pig enterprise, which I have some experience in. We have been basically painted into a corner by both government policy on feeding waste and also by government policy on creating subsidies for green energy, which has robbed an animal, which is a monogastric animal, which was perfectly capable of converting waste into protein, of really the only viable way of producing that meat. So has the government, Johnny, this isn't really for you, has the...
Come on, Johnny, what's the government's
No, I
view
just
on
have to ask him. No, so Janet, so, you know, has the government considered this and the direction that they're taking vis-a-vis green energy and food production?
Yeah, and I think that there's a sort of recognition that there are a lot of competing demands on the land that we have available in the country. And in the food strategy, if you've seen it, that was published just a couple of weeks ago, the government made a commitment to maintain food security and the kind of proportion of food that we produce here at home. There is also there are commitments about land use for the purposes of carbon sequestration, and we obviously want you to continue producing food, and a lot of what we want to do is about land sharing activities, not land sparing activities. So, and the difference being sharing things you do in the course of your farming, sparing things you do around your farming on less productive areas or existing habitats. And in the food strategy, there was a commitment made to come up with a land use framework to try and pull together all these competing demands on land and set out what is the policy for what we want to do here and what we're trying to achieve, and therefore allow all of us working on different aspects of this policy around government to dock into something bigger that sets out the overall strategy, so that we don't have different bits of government with competing agendas, competing with the same bit of land, but instead we have a clear strategic view of what we're trying to achieve. I think the government's view, I'm not a politician, by the way, I should say, and so I don't want to stray into kind of politics, but the government's view is that you shouldn't have a kind of top-down, this bit of land is for this bit of land is for that kind of approach, but you do need some way of trading off between different demands on land. But the overall ethos of the reforms we're introducing is to provide incentives and a framework within which farmers can make choices based on where they are, what their situation is, what their business model is, and what their preferences are. But we ought to make sure that adds up again, back up again to a coherent whole when you look at it alongside energy policy. So the land use framework is the way we'll do that. And that's coming out next year, I should say.
And it's a really, really good question, and it's a question you could ask Henry Dimbleby later this afternoon. He's coming. There were, in fact, last week 3 food strategy reports that came out. It's the UK's strategy on the Monday. The Sustainable Food Trust brought out its strategy on the Wednesday, which would support a lot of the direction of travel that you're suggesting. And then on Thursday, Scotland came out with its own food strategy. And the land use framework is something that the House of Lords is looking into at the moment, chaired by Lord Cameron. Quick plug for the CLA, past president. And it becomes a philosophical question to some. You know, should you use your land for solar panels? Should you use your land for maize to put into an AD plant? Should you use your land for feed wheat to feed to a pig or a chicken? And I think from our association's point of view, it is about freedom of choice for the land steward to do what he would like with the land within legal constraints. But we are, as you quite rightly say, been forced down a route which may or may not be right, and it's a philosophical argument we can have after. Do we have another question? So, a question over here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Hilton Phillipson. I practice regenerative agriculture on my farm in Leicestershire, not far from Johnny. And like the three panelists, I believe that livestock are a fundamental part of any integrated system. My question is really for Johnny and also for Janet. Do you look at where your soya comes from? And Janet, does DEFRA have a vote around the cabinet table to try to ensure that the government does not fall for short-term political expediency in going for a free trade deal with Brazil, and instead is mindful of preserving the lungs of the world and not allowing Britain to be flooded with cheap imports of beef, which actually are on the way to being as great a threat to our security as President Putin? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my question was short at yes, but no. So we are, on the poultry, obviously our cattle, we don't have any soya, they just live off the land. Our poultry were forced to take the food from our integrator. The poultry industry is a really weird industry in the broiler world anyway, whereby you buy your chicks from the integrator, who are very big and can negotiate directly with the supermarkets, and you have to have your food from them. So they source the soy. Now, because they're big, and we do have Tesco's agricultural sustainability manager in the room, and she will attest to this, I'm sure. But because these integrators are big, they have to source their soy responsibly. And so we have some assurance that that soy comes from a good place. But ultimately, we want to cut soy out. Of course we do. And all we can do at the moment is lobby the integrators to do that as hard as we possibly can. They're looking at insects, they're looking at lupins or other sources. But we need the supermarkets to be prepared to pay a bit more money for a more environmentally friendly bird.
And on trade policy, so yes, DEFRA has a seat around the table at Cabinet, and all of these policies are collectively agreed by government. That's how it works. There is a team in DEFRA that leads on trade policy. I'm not responsible for that team, but they do work with the Department for International Trade to inform the position. As to what you think about the political view about what decisions have been made, I'm afraid no one's elected me, and that's way beyond my capability to comment. Because I'm an official, I don't want to be slopey-shouldered, but I'm an official, and it's not for me to comment on politics, especially outside my area.
Yes, so it's an unfair question for Janet, but what I would say, representing a group of members who own land, particularly with regard to trade deals, what I have asked for is that we had trade envoys who go out to those countries to make sure that our high-quality product is sold to them, and that any product coming into this country is labelled as such, so that the consumer can make the choice. Now, it's political horse trading as to who won, and we all can read the papers and take a view. But I think from our own perspective as producers, we need to produce high-quality food which produces the smallest amount of methane from those animals that we possibly can to farm in a climate-friendly way. Now, I'm just looking around. Have we got another question? Question here. Excellent.
Thank you. I'm Alice, excuse me, the token Tesco rep. But I just had a question for the panel about how retailers can support you effectively. How can we work with government to make sure that we're also incentivising or supporting environmental outcomes on farms? What's the sort of best role for us? Is it in purchasing carbon credits or biodiversity credits that are generated on your farms? Is it trying to keep those credits in the supply chain? Should we be helping fund tech and innovation, things like that? Is it about getting the message to consumers? Are we that link between the farmer and the consumer? Should we be helping you promote sustainable produce in that way and things like that? Or is it, the topic of price premium is a really interesting one, given we're facing a cost of living crisis at the moment, and we don't want to price the average British consumer, who is also the average Tesco customer, out of buying sustainable produce. We don't want to put the price of food up and force them to purchase, imports that are maybe at a lower environmental standard if we're giving price premiums for sustainable produce. So how can retailers, how can we use our position in the market and things like that to most effectively support you and to help blend private and public finance?
Alice, thank you very much indeed. 9.1%, I think, inflation, £385 added to the cost of the average shopping basket. If I go to Chris and then Sophie, please.
Hi, Alice. Yes, over the last few decades, food as a percentage of the consumer's income has gone from, I think it was about 7% back in the 70s. No, 15%, sorry, 15%. And now is it currently about 7%? I think the value of food has been lost. And I think part of the issue is that people have got other ways of spending their money, but I think the importance of food has got to come back into prominence. And labelling would be a big help of the different farming types and country of origin, and that includes processed food as well. I mean, one of the biggest other markets is, say, the consumer markets of motorway service stations where the consumer doesn't have a clue where their food comes from, and that would probably go with a few of your products as well, which are just mass-produced. I think one of the big things is labelling, correct labelling and accurate labelling. And produced or packaged has to be more accurate, it has to be detailed.
Thank you very much for your question, Alice. I really do think it's an imbalance of power. I think the big food companies want to push all their costs onto farmers who take the risk. We haven't been paid a realistic sum for the produce we create. And my worry is that with all the demands for being more climate friendly, we're going to perhaps get some grants for a while from government, great. But ultimately, all those very high-end, high standards are going to become the norm, and we're not going to get a proper premium for it. So I think farmers need some of your profits.
So if I could take one more question, please, because I've had... I'm going to go over to this lady over here. That's very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just interested in...
Sorry, could you be kind and give your name?
Yes, my name's Olivia. I'm a farm vet and have now got interest in agricultural policy. I'm just interested in sort of marrying up the conversation between the farmers and the representative from DEFRA. How far do the farmers agree with the ELMs, and will they apply for it?
Thank you. Well, we can ask each of the three as to whether they'll...
No pressure, I'm just sitting right here.
As to whether you'll look to environmental land management. We'll just go Chris first.
Thank you, yeah. Well, we will definitely look at it. As I said in my presentation, we have an environmental enterprise. It has to make money, and we try to make as many of the opportunities that arises. One of my big problems is actually the transition between the old schemes to ELMs, where I find I'm going to be probably disadvantaged. And so we will look at it. It will sit along the rest of our farm enterprises, and we will try and go for it, because I'm that way inclined.
Why do you think you're going to be disadvantaged, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've looked at the initial sort of figures, and because I'm in existing schemes, that precludes me from entering new schemes. And the complications of that are quite hard. I mean, at the moment, currently, I have an income of about 25,000 from the old scheme. I'm actually just at the moment in an argument with DEFRA because they fined me 8,000 because of the different land codes, or different land codes between BPS and obviously the stewardship schemes. And some of the discrepancies are just mind-bogglingly awful. But that's a
Let's
personal
talk after, and
yes.
I'll see if I can help you out with that.
So, Johnny?
So, in terms of SFI, you and I were just talking about that before, Janet. We're going to look at it. Our approach generally has been to be in stewardship, and we're seeing this potential extension for that. I realise not everyone in the room is a farmer, but it'd be interesting just to see a quick show of hands, if I can be really bossy, Mark, to see hands up for who's going to do it first and then who isn't going to do it. Hands up for who is going to go into SFI, they think, best guess. And hands up for who isn't. Okay, so you're doing okay proportionally. So we'll certainly look at it. Eleanor, I think we're very likely to be in. As a cluster farm, we were hoping as a cluster farm that we could be in landscape. I think that's looking less likely now, and probably Eleanor is more of the fit. So if there is a room for cluster farms to go into Eleanor, we'd certainly be keen on that. And I think the other big question is stacking. For us, if we're able to do your scheme as well as the private market, then we're certainly keener on it.
And the answer is you can, according to Janet. So, Sophie?
Yes, I was more circumspect, lukewarm to start with, but I'm warming up to it. And it seems churlish not to participate, basically. It's, a really radical change. And I think we all need to get on board, participate, so that we can fashion it to work for us. So I'm looking forward to the higher levels of the scheme, the organic scheme and things. So yeah, definitely. Nothing to lose.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank all the panelists on your behalf. We've had an amazing session looking towards climate-friendly farming. It's got, lovely and warm in this tent. I hope we have warmed you up. We've thought about a number of key issues, and I, for one, on my farm, will continue in my countryside stewardship mid-tier to answer your question over here. I will move into the first element that I can move into, which is sustainable farming 2022 on soils, and I will take the money because what's not to like about it? It's a no-brainer, to coin a phrase. And then I will go into the other schemes as they evolve, because this is, to coin a phrase from the Secretary of State, an evolution and not a revolution. This is a journey that we're all on, in the way that the Cherry family have taken us on an amazing journey into regenerative farming and building our soil. So thank you very, very much indeed for all of your attention, and have a great day.